We're now live on YouTube with the March 18th, 2019 edition of the OpenJS Bootstrap team meeting. We're joined by 13 individuals today, and we have a pretty decent agenda put together for things to get started with. I think it is worth mentioning this is the first iteration of this meeting as the new OpenJS Foundation, which we launched last week, and we are joined, by a few faces that are newer to the meeting. So, welcome to those of you who haven't attended yet, and for those of you who are tuning in for the first time. We do not have a super huge agenda, so I figure we can jump right in and get started. The first agenda item that we have is number 116 from the Bootstrap repo, which is add responsibility for charter review. So at the last node.js board meeting that was in February, we brought a bunch of stage 2 proposals to the board for review. For those of you who aren't familiar with the staging process, if you go to github.com/node.js/bootstrap, you can see there's a folder called proposals, and in there's a README that outlines the process. There's a staging_process.markdown at the root directory of the repo, which goes through the whole proposal process. I'm just dropping that in the chat for reference for people. Stage 1 is, hey, we have this proposal. This is what we think it looks like. Stage 2 is everyone from the committee agrees that this is something that we want to land, and the shape and implementation of it. And stage 3 means that it's been reviewed by the board or any other groups that need to review it and give approval. So the majority of bits that were required for bootstrapping the foundation and getting the bylaws together were done. One of the first things that we need to do now is charter and form the cross-project council. Part of this is having a charter for the cross-project council. And so we have a first iteration of the charter, which has gone stage 2 from this committee. When it had gone to the board, they did request a very small change, which let me see if I can get this. The changes in this one single commit that I just put in. And it's adding some explicit details in here about the chartering of other projects. So specifically it adds to the list of responsibilities and expectations of the CPC, this one area that says voting members are responsible for approving the charter and any updates for projects which are part of the foundation. As part of this review approval, the voting members will ensure that the updated charter is compatible with the mission of the foundation and reach consensus with the board on more substantial changes before final approval by CPC. The purpose for this extra bit was to make it explicitly clear that the CPC is responsible for managing the projects charters individually, but also to add in that stipulation that for larger changes that the board must be brought in to have consensus on it. Are there any objections to the addition of this language or questions about it?
I guess I have one quick question. It still uses the $ foundation. Is that something we should be trying to change at this point?
If you actually look at the second commit that's in there, in the PR, it changes that.
Okay, cool.
I just dropped the commit to keep it so you could see the localized change.
Gotcha.
So are there any objections to landing this change to the CPC charter? Excellent. So I'll go ahead and merge that. And Mike Dolan, can you just confirm for me that in the I guess the inaugural OpenJS board meeting, it was considered that this proposal was ready for stage 3 with this addition?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll go
Sorry,
ahead
Miles.
and
I'm covering two board meetings right now, so sorry.
no problem. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and open the PR that moves that to stage 3, and we'll be able to kind of immediately land that. That will give us, the baseline charter for the CPC, which we can then iterate on as, we move forward and if we find any issues with it. So the next thing we have on this is number 108, which is a proposal to move expectations to phase 3. So for those of you who maybe have not been following along, at Node+JS Interactive in October, we all met together and kind of kicked off this whole Bootstrap process. And there was a whole bunch of different brainstorming. A lot of this was led by Adam, who I think might be on the call. No, that ComCom was Tierney. But a lot of those ideas and thoughts and things that happened in there all ended up inside of this expectations doc, which included notes about bylaw requirements, as well as communicated expectations, mission statement drafts, and a handful of other bits. So this was brought to the board to move to stage 3, and the request from the board was that we introduced an artifacts folder for the merged bylaws. And the request from the board was that for stage 3 with this, the board agreed that the things that are in this document are important, but that just kind of landing it as approved and something to be enforced is kind of hard, especially with just such a substantial change with lots of things in it. Now, there are a handful of different things that are inside of this expectation doc that have already been implemented. For example, there was stuff in here around like the mission, for example. So the idea was that we would take this, we would land it into the artifacts folder so that we're documenting, this, maybe add a bit of context about where it came from. But then what we would do is we would independently break out the bits of this expectation doc that has not been implemented into current policy or process and turn them into their own proposals. So an example for this as one of the ones that can be broken out into their own, its own proposal would be like the expectations of the foundation or the expectations of the board or the expectations of the executive director. That each of these could be broken out into their own proposals with kind of, being more explicit about how it could be followed, how it should be upheld. Does anyone see any problems with that plan moving forward?
So at this point, it just would not be under the proposals, but an artifacts directory. Is that the main difference?
So it would stay in proposals, but the other proposals, you'll notice that like the artifact itself gets moved up to the root directory. Mm-hmm. So in the CPC charter, the stage 3 folder will have everything of where that was at when it went to stage 3, and then the artifact is moved to the root directory and future changes are made there. So I think our idea would be that rather than moving the artifact to the root directory, it would move to the artifacts folder with a bit of an explanation. And then we would kind of break out the bits that haven't made it into, any sort of policy or process and start turning those into their own proposals.
Okay.
So if there's no objections, I'll go ahead and, move forward with that unless anyone else feels like doing the work. I will take that silence as me volunteering to follow that through. So the third thing that we have on the agenda here, and let's try to maybe keep this to about 15 minutes if possible, so we can leave time for the big agenda item today, which is going through the next steps. This is number 90, project-directed funding. This was opened by Jory. Jory, would you like to introduce this agenda item?
Sure thing. So this is just, again, capturing a concern or an issue that we identified during one of our ad hoc meetings several weeks ago about providing guidelines and just understanding of how projects can use tools like crowdfunding platforms like Open Collective, for example, and also do so in such a way that the foundation can support and be very clear on. And then the second is to start to explore how the foundation, OpenJS Foundation, can support projects who are doing maybe specific fundraising from companies for concerns that they might have. And so we've got a couple of projects now that are fundraising for development time, for example. And of course, they would love it if there was a way for a company to be able to donate and earmark funds for their specific need. And so this issue captured that as a concern, and also captured that we would need to be working certainly with the board and with the project maintainers and the CPC to sort of identify what a good solution might really look like, to kind of let everybody know where we're at on at least some of it. Right now, there are a handful of OpenJS Foundation projects that are using, I believe, Open Collective to do some fundraising, and they have disclaimers on their pages right now that say, that it is an individual activity, that it's not something that's being conducted by the foundation. And that's just to separate a bit of the concern and make sure it's clear that that's not an activity that the OpenJS Foundation is doing, but rather the group of individuals. And that's where we're at the moment. So now that we have a real now that we're a real foundation, the OpenJS Foundation, I think it's probably a good opportunity for us to figure out how we want to organize to tackle this problem as a group.
Now, I think we'd agreed last meeting to take it off the agenda until we'd gotten through some other things. If I look at the last comment,
okay,
it added back on. But I thought that was the discussion that we agreed it was important, but we thought that getting things ramped up and bootstrapped was the first step, and then we could come back to this.
Okay, then it seems like perhaps we missed removing that label. If that's the case, unless anyone who's on the call who wasn't on in last week's meeting, then we can just remove the label for now and revisit it.
So the one point that I would just add as we get to visiting this in the future is the Linux Foundation also added a no-fee service for this sort of work called Community Bridge, and it was announced last week as well. So it might be worth investigating that as a help in this, or one option in this.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the label.
I just did that.
I think we race conditioned.
Okay.
You both added and removed the Bootstrap agenda labels just now.
Okay.
It's funny because yours says you added and then removed. Mine says I removed it. So.
Yeah, I think you got there first. Okay, so kind of going back to it, then the last agenda item that we have for today is number 115, which is steps to bootstrap CPC and new foundation. And, we have this issue that was opened by Michael. Michael, do you want to introduce it?
Sure. So it's just an issue so that where we could add in the bullet points of things we need to do to bootstrap the foundation. There's kind of two sections, bootstrapping and post-bootstrap. So for example, the post-directed funding is on that post-bootstrap list just to show the things we're going to start with and then the things that we'll get back to so we don't forget them. Right now, it's a fairly small list with, updating the government's docs to reflect the name of the foundation, confirm the list of initial impact projects, and complete the language for the project exit clause. And I think today we should probably spend some time adding to that list in terms of, concrete things that need to happen.
So maybe, a good place where we could start here would be just reviewing that list and then just kind of adding things that come up. Some things that actually just come up to me right now off the top of my head is that the Zoom is still the Node.js Zoom, and the repo that we have is still in the Node.js repo. And perhaps all of these should be in a more neutral space for the new foundation rather than just the Node.js project.
Yes, I mean, we need a new repo for like the Bootstrap meeting and all that stuff. And I guess Zooms would be something separate, but.
Additionally, the Node.js org is the Node.js Foundation, not Node.js.
Well, I think in the new world, it's possible that the Node.js org is just the Node.js project as opposed to the foundation itself.
Yeah.
Brian is on the call. Brian, we have a couple different orgs that are available for us to use. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. We preemptively registered a bunch when we weren't really sure how it was all going to shake out. I can take it to put together a list of the options. Although actually, Miles, I think we'd already discussed that, hadn't we? I'm trying to remember if this is needed or if it's helpful to throw this back open.
So there was a doodle that was sent out, I believe, and then Brian, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that we have OpenJSF, OpenJS Foundation with no hyphen, and OpenJS hyphen Foundation.
I believe that's right. Let me just double check here. I have it somewhere.
And then we had done a poll of at least the, what was that? It was like the top level committees in the Node.js projects. And I think that it seemed to have gone more in the direction of OpenJS hyphen Foundation. But since then it was apparent that it was the openjsf.org was the URL that we moved forward with. So I guess, kind of to the group, does anyone have a preference that they have based on the ones that are available?
I think it makes sense to align with the URL. Giuseppe here. I'm not a big fan of OpenJSF just because of the JSF part. I mean, nothing against JSF, but moving on to something new. But I think if we are going to land on that URL, it makes sense to keep that for the GitHub repo as well.
It's also less characters to type. So.
Yeah.
Oh, so sorry. Which one are you talking about, John?
OpenJSF is the URL that we've been using, .org.
So I will say that there was the majority in the Tracy Hines sent out a poll to the ComCom. The majority was for, I believe, OpenJS Foundation.
Yeah.
So I do want to make sure that's voiced.
Yeah.
Also, there's the question of how it'll look on a T-shirt and a mug. So, like, we're probably not going to use OpenJSF on either of those. So we'll be known as OpenJS with Foundation. At least that's what the logo is showing. So, I mean, in some ways, OpenJS.org would make more sense there, but I think that ship has sailed.
Well, has it? Is that an open question at all?
No,
Pretty early on.
So, I mean, for what it's worth, from where I'm coming, and Brian can kind of chime in, there was a handful of URLs that were brought up and were available, and the board had voted on URLs, and OpenJSF was the one that had won out on that. Now, with that being said, this URL could redirect to another if we can reach consensus through all parties that we want to do a different URL as the landing for the foundation itself. It's also possible that we have the landing page for the foundation and the GitHub org not entirely aligned. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. Brian, can you remind us what URLs were available?
Sure. So for the OpenJS Foundation variants, we had ojs.foundation, openjs.foundation, openjsf.org. And that was about it. Openjs.org is already registered, so that one's not available to us. We should also have, if I remember correctly, we have the .NET and the .dev variants of OpenJSF. So I just checked and I realized we never set up the forwarding from openjs.foundation to the current website. So I'll talk to IT and get that done today. But you know, the just so that everybody maybe knows how this typically goes, when we register the variants, we're doing it so that we have some options at the beginning, but also to make sure that nobody registers a confusingly similar one later on down the road. Yeah. So the plan is for these, you know, these different variants to automatically renew. If we did decide to choose one variant or another, it's kind of just matters what you put on the t-shirt, because they all go to the same place in the end.
I mean, I'll say I personally prefer OpenJS.Foundation. OpenJSF isn't the brand, if that makes sense. Like, it's not actually what it is. It's like one specific word is like sliced out in favor of an acronym. So I prefer OpenJS.Foundation. I don't know if that's really open for us to kind of vote on or ask of the board, since they agreed on OpenJS.org.
Yeah, so
that's definitely my preference.
Yeah, so both boards did vote, and they preferred the shorter name versus the longer name. But again, you know, I just need to talk to IT. It was my mistake that I didn't get this forwarding requested and put into place. Either one is fine. They'll all go to the same place. It's more a question for things like GitHub, where you can't necessarily do forwarding from one organization name to another.
Well, and OpenJS? Did I just look at? OpenJS is taken.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if we do something long, it won't be taken, I guess. But OpenJS by itself is taken.
Yeah.
By somebody who's had it for 6 years and done nothing with it. But
another one, OpenJSFoundation.org, is being squatted by someone. I just purchased OpenJS-Foundation.org.
Nice.
It's the fact that OpenJSFoundation.org is now being squatted by someone else actually leaves me not wanting us to use the one with the hyphen, because now a misspell is going to send someone somewhere else.
Well, I mean, as far as the squatting, you can always get that back pretty easily if you can show you hold the mark. So it's, I don't know. I mean, I don't like a lot of typing either, but on the other hand, OpenJSF is not really what, I mean, it's more of like just a shorthand for what we are, but OpenJS would be more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we can't get openjs.org. That one. I mean, we can make an offer on it, but
it's also registered in GitHub, I think.
So
by itself, it's pretty taken. So it seems like, I don't know, like the fact that it's long isn't going to be that much of a problem, I would think. It's not, you know, as far as like GitHub and I mean, people are going to get to it through Google or whatever, and then it's over.
I think one other thing maybe to keep in mind too is that for putting on mugs and t-shirts, we probably would be, I mean, I don't want to speak in absolute terms here, but it seems like it would be unlikely that we'd be putting that on, putting the foundation's URL or the foundation's GitHub organization on, you know, things that would be space constrained.
Yeah, I'm
just focus being on the projects.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking in terms of people who actually have to go to GitHub and use it and get to the repos, right? That's where extra characters might.
Yeah, I don't think that'll be that many people though, compared to like people going to node.js or one of the projects. So, yeah, I mean, obviously having something short is nice, but on the other hand, We don't like, unless we decide we want to go, you know, all in on OpenJSF, then maybe it'd be better to stay with OpenJS and something.
Yeah, adding the foundation, OpenJS Foundation or OpenJS Foundation, whatever it ends up being, also has the benefit of being unambiguous. If you are somebody who's coming and looking for code, it's kind of right in your face there. This is the foundations repo versus one of the project repos.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yep.
Yeah.
We already have. So do we already have OpenJS Foundation registered with GitHub?
We do.
Okay.
Miles, I think you got that one. I have OpenJS Foundation without the hyphen.
Yeah, you can call me Mr. Hyphen because I've got both the GitHub org and the domain registered now.
We'll call you Mr. Soft Hyphen.
So I think what could make sense if we wanted to go in this direction, you know, both boards did vote on it, but I think it's worth considering that both boards voted on this prior to the merger, and we're doing so just trying to get something out the door. I personally, as a board member, do not feel that anyone from the board is super married to any of these names and would be open to suggestions. I could be incorrect on that, but that is, you know, my gut on this. I think that if the community explicitly wanted something and we had like some degree of consensus here, that we could make a request to the board to revisit that decision. And I think that having the URL and the GitHub org align and consistent branding across the place definitely has its benefit. I do think there's, you know, whether or not we want OpenJS.Foundation or OpenJS foundation.org is definitely up for debate as well. And we can have all these URLs all redirect to each other as well. So we can, for example, Tierney, we could have openjs.foundation be a redirect to openjsfoundation.org. I think that there was maybe a concern that the .foundation domain itself was not as professional. But to be honest, I can't recall 100% if that was really a conversation or just my own bias.
I tend to like the orgs as well, but we, the JS Foundation had js.foundation as this primary domain. So it'll work. But I probably would go with openjs-foundation.org.
Personally, is like, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tierney.
I was just gonna say, like, as a minimalist, the dash in the domain feels like you weren't able to get the domain you wanted, so you went with the one with the dash. Then that feels like super unprofessional to me. So that's why I prefer the OpenJS.Foundation. That's my personal bias.
Yeah, and the flip side for me, Tierney, was like I liked the dash because it created a separation between the two words and made it clear what was what.
Yeah, definitely understand.
I think it makes sense to gather the different areas that we're figuring out naming and put together the options and maybe look at this all together, you know, in terms of the website, the GitHub repo, the branding, which I think we've largely figured out, but, you know, any other places that this should be a consideration, and then bringing it all together.
I guess the question is, do we want to block on having a new GitHub organization we can start working on to figure that out?
We can move it, right? So maybe we pick one and go with it and then, you know, figure it out.
We can move it. I do think that it's pretty reasonable to assume that we're not really going to want to move it.
Yeah.
We can transfer, like the good news is we can transfer repos between organizations. So I think the plan would be once we have the new org to just transfer over the current existing repo over to that new org, the Bootstrap repo, and then likely create a CPC repo. And if we did decide to change the name, we could transfer all the repos in between. So we don't need to block on this. Perhaps all we need to do is make a decision about what to move forward with. As Tierney mentioned, the poll that had currently gone out, I believe, was erring heavily towards including the hyphen. So I don't know if anyone has any objections to that, but we could move forward with that. as kind of like a first pass, and then make sure that we have consensus on that being kind of the branding that we want, as opposed to no hyphen, and then make a request to the board regarding the domain URL, if that's the direction that we want to go.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, agreed.
Sounds good to me too.
Yep.
Okay, so if no one objects, I'm going to move forward with transferring the Bootstrap repo to OpenJS Foundation and creating a new membership in there where we emulate the current node.js Bootstrap team that exists and spin down the one in the node.js org that currently exists. That may result in some individuals who currently have membership in the node.js org losing it. Should we keep that group around in the node.js org, perhaps just kind of as a legacy for those who have been doing the work?
I think leaving it there for some period of time makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave that in there. Then I guess the last bit would be, I'm currently the sole admin of the OpenJS Foundation org on GitHub. I think perhaps it makes sense to make one member of the Linux Foundation staff, maybe Mike, who's the acting executive director, and then the 3 community board members to be the current admins of that org. Does anyone object to that?
That makes perfect sense. That's going to be what I was going to suggest. So yeah.
Great. And then we can, as the CPC spins up and we get voting members and all that figured out, we can bike shed about who the owners are at that point.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So we have those action items. Mike, do you want to go through some more of this list that we have?
Sure. Okay. So I have added in the, update the governance docs to reflect the name selected in the foundation. So we do have that for the CPC governance, but we need to go through and do it for the rest of the docs. I think that should just be a cut and paste. I'm willing to volunteer to do that.
Okay, great.
So let me just take a note. We'll update dollar foundation. Confirm the list of initial impact projects. So I think, Jory, you had a list, and we need to confirm that that is the list, right?
Well, that is the list of projects who have declared for impact. I have not had any additional projects come forward and say that they wish to change their election to impact. And just so, to be clear with everyone, that's obviously Node, jQuery, Dojo, Appium, and Webpack.
Were there a couple of open ones that hadn't responded yet?
I did not have a response from PEP or Interledger. And I had sent a note that said, unless I hear from you otherwise, that I would consider that you were opting into the at-large stage.
Okay.
So.
Great.
Has anybody talked to Express?
I don't think anyone has explicitly talked to Express. When we had talked to the Express, I think maybe it was James who had reached out to the Express project initially. We can reach out to the Express project and check to see if they want to. LibBV had made it pretty clear that they were not interested in that kind of representation, but it's a good point that we should, reach out to Express again and see if they're interested.
Yeah, that's my, I'm comfortable that LibBV is not, but we should just check with Express.
Mike, do you have enough of a connection with the Express project to perhaps run with that?
Which Mike? Was that Mike Dolan you're asking, or me?
I was asking you.
I can send an email to the maintainers and see what they say.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So I am curious for the impact projects. I think some of them have been, following along as they have been able. But at this point, would it be accurate to say that I should start encouraging them to send at least one member of the project to each of these meetings moving forward?
I think that at the very least for the impact projects, that makes a ton of sense.
Right. I was just adding to the list is that we need the impact projects to identify their CPC representatives. So
yeah,
they could start sending somebody in advance of whatever formal election or something they need to do. But
yeah, however they want to decide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so update the governance docs, confirm list of initial impact projects. So yeah, encouraging people to come, asking them to like start the process. I guess the question should be like, do we need some sort of timeline for when we expect, the representatives to be identified and the first CPC meeting?
I mean, it made, to me, one that seemed very reasonable was the upcoming Collaborator Summit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That gives us about like 2 months.
I think that's more than fair. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a long time. So okay, so basically we want to have the representatives in place for that meeting. Okay, sounds good. Let's see, complete language for project exit clause, which is 96. Who opened that?
That sounds like
Jory, yeah.
So that was just the case for what a project needs to know and what the process might look like if they decide they wanted to take their project to a different foundation. I said at the time that this wasn't this is not an urgent thing. There's nobody who's like, I want out or anything like that, but just that it had been raised as a question, so it should be addressed at some point.
So
I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I think that that's actually an important one to get into sooner than later, because if projects are looking to join, this is probably a good piece of mind, or at least something to share with people that are thinking of participating. Before they join, they probably want to know what it means to unjoin.
Right. I guess the key question is that on right now it's listed in the bootstrapping list. Does it belong there or the post bootstrap, which would be after the CPC forms?
It kind of feels like something that's a little bit in the middle to me, mostly because there may be projects that are interested in joining during the bootstrap. But I guess if those projects are okay with that kind of being ambiguous or them participating in defining it, perhaps simply having it identified in the post bootstrap is, sufficient.
Right.
I agree with that. It would be fine to identify it in the post bootstrap, and further, I think it's probably more we need to get probably Andy or Mike to just refresh ourselves on what's required, because for example they can't just take the project out and then say, okay, well now it's a business, for example. That's against the rules. So kind of what is allowed and what they can do and can't do is, I think, maybe more of a legal question than it is policy.
So I'm taking in the minutes is like, maybe the ask is like, can Andy provide a first draft of what that might look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess no project can join until the CPC forms. So putting it as post bootstrap isn't terrible, although continuing with that, like if Andy can have a first draft and we can sort of push it along in parallel, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, that's actually a really good a good question, because I think Miles just mentioned projects might want to join while Bootstrap is in progress, but we have had some projects asking already.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know, Jory, you've gotten some of those emails.
Yeah.
I don't know what our answer can be to them, that, wait a couple of months if we want to do that, but we just need to give them an idea of when they can expect to have the CPC or some precursor of the CPC address whatever, their application.
Right. I mean, I'd say they can get involved and start participating like other people, but if we need to follow the project progression, we probably need the CPC in place. And if our target's that collaborator summit, then that gives the timeline.
But Michael, I guess like the alternative to that, depending, is like if a very, and I'm not saying that this is the case or the only reason for it, but just a case study that I think is important. If a very large project came in, one that like we have unanimous approval within everyone that like, oh my God, this is definitely a project we want in our foundation, and they want to participate in the Bootstrap process, and they would like to be one of the initial impact level projects, why wouldn't we kind of let them join now?
I mean, like you said, if there's consensus across, I guess it's, in my mind, it's just a little more difficult to say, how do you get that consensus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe you need to go back to the projects and say, okay, well, you don't have your CPC representatives, so can your project somehow give the same agreement that they would, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's like we're bootstrapping the application process at the same time we're bootstrapping the foundation, I guess. So it actually would be handy to have at least a few that would participate in some informal way, because I think their input about, what's it like to come in and become a project will be useful for being able to get these documents, to answer the questions they need to have answered.
And I think very much to that, one like nugget of something Miles said earlier was like, it'd be useful to get project input or, potential future project input on what exiting should be. Moving it back to this discussion about exiting and like that part of it, getting input from them on it additionally would be helpful, I think. So.
Yeah, I think it no doubt would be. I mean, just like the top level 30-second outline for exiting in the JSF was, if you want to go, you can go. We're usually holding, you can go anywhere that it's another nonprofit. And if you want to transfer your trademarks, like your project logos and stuff, you can transfer to those as well. But it can't be to, for example, a for-profit organization. So you can't, incubate yourself in the OpenJS Foundation and then decide later that you want to start making money off of it.
And I think some places say, okay, well, you have to go to a C3 if you're leaving a C6. But I don't think that it does not strike me that we are the kind of group that's going to say, you can, like, it's the Hotel California,
Right.
So, just sort of making sure that we know that that it's their choice to be here, and we're very happy to have them, and that kind of thing is I think it's comforting for folks. But
yeah, it's really just about making sure that the open source ideals are preserved, and that we don't have someone decide to take a logo for their project and then go form a company and then say, we are the project, we are a for-profit company that owns this project.
Yeah, so if it would help, this is Brian. If it would help, I can talk with Andy and Russ, and we can figure out the right way to put language and guidance in place around this.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So you will notice now that the Bootstrap repo is in the OpenJS Foundation, and all of you have been invited to it, just as an aside.
Okay, yeah, I wonder if my save just failed to work. But,
Sorry if I race conditioned you again there.
well, I don't know. I did a save. Let's see if that's still.
It's like magic. I just hit refresh and boom.
Yeah, I think it lost my latest editing, but anyway, that's okay. Because we decided, yeah, okay, so let's move this down to here. Because I was live editing as we talked.
Apologies.
Let me remember what we added. What did we add to the list? Confirm the list of initial impact. Anyway, okay, I can probably put it back together. Update the governance docs. Confirm the list of initial impact projects. So we're going to talk. We have the list. We're going to start encouraging people. Right, we needed to set a initial CPC target for initial CPC meeting. We need to document that somewhere, but collaborator summit. We need to get a new Zoom. I think that's the other thing. If we want a separate Zoom from the Node.js Zoom, I guess we need to ask the foundation to get one of those.
Yeah, we need a new YouTube channel as well.
Right. I guess somebody just needs to go and ask the marketing team to put those in place, right? Have any volunteers?
I volunteer.
Is that Brian?
That's Brian. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions about the Zoom conference would be, I mean, really what we need is the webinar license, and that's, relatively pricey. I have one. I'm not, and it was purely for supporting the Node.js Foundation board. So is there anything that we can think of that would be very specifically OpenJS Foundation business versus the current Node, Node Foundation business, or sorry, Node project business that would require a separate webinar license aside from mine?
I mean, this meeting.
Yeah.
So this meeting, I guess that was my question. Aside from this meeting and the board meeting.
This meeting, then there'll be the CPC meeting, and whatever other teams are spinning up. We should be able to run the Zoom without having conflict. As it is right now, the Node.js project is already feeling pain in the Zoom just to run all the working group meetings that exist. So I think that we definitely need a separate one for the foundation proper.
That said, can I just add one thing? So with the experience of the ComCom and TSC, I believe, the foundation was able to get us like sub accounts that are somehow on the same license, the webinar license. So you might want to explore that. I'm happy to give you more details if that'll be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I can check. I will check with RT people as well. So I guess then what I'm taking away from this is the webinar account or the webinar license that I have for running the board meetings should be sufficient for the OpenJS Foundation business, because it's unlikely that, we would have, say, a CPC meeting that would overlap with the board meeting, because we need to schedule those so that people can participate in both. Those who need to can participate in both. And then at the same time, we'll retain the existing Node webinar license so that those work groups can continue to work and do their thing. Is that a correct way to characterize it?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, in retrospect, the foundation moving foundation business off of the Node.js Zoom and the Node.js Zoom being specific for the project will actually probably alleviate a bunch of the current existing kind of duplicates and problems that exist.
Right.
Now, I think there's a bigger question about like other projects and if other projects need access to a similar infrastructure. And that I think is a bigger question about foundation resource allocation. And perhaps we should find out how much the licensing cost is for Zoom, if they maybe have something more enterprise grade that we could get where we could have accounts for like webinar accounts for each of the projects. Tierney mentioned the multi-accounts. I do believe even with those multiple accounts, only one webinar can be running at a time. So perhaps we want to reach out to Zoom and just figure out, something more scalable so that lots of projects can have access to these things.
You can put that as an action for me. I'll check and see. As far as I know, among the other Linux Foundation projects, I don't know of any others that use the Zoom webinar at scale quite the way you do here. So I can ask them to look into that, and it may take a little bit to get an answer back, but I'll take it.
No problem. Thank you.
Right. I think the other reason why it makes sense to have them separate is that, you know, in the Node project, we give quite a few people access to setting up the webinars and so forth, so that it makes sense to have some separation in terms of who can create, edit, and basically attend those meetings from that perspective.
Yeah, agreed. That makes a ton of sense, Michael.
We've only got about 2 minutes left for today. Is there any other big things that we should dig into? I guess not big things. Is there anything that people feel that we didn't get to that maybe we should make sure we visit for next week? I guess we didn't talk about the timing of this meeting at all, and if we want to keep it going in the same time slot. Jory, I think you're about to say something and I interrupted you.
Yeah, so I was going to say, you know, we've been talking a bit about sort of overall foundation housekeeping, which is very important. And I think the other thing we'll want to dig into in the coming weeks is sort of the project housekeeping component, which may include updating, helping the projects make sure their websites get updated to include references to the OpenJS Foundation, digging into what we need to do to update the CLA for OpenJS Foundations or help them switch over to a DCO, that kind of thing. So
I guess what we need is, I think what you're suggesting is we need to build a checklist, like a project checklist.
I am, yes.
So let's add that specifically on the list. And so we should open an issue that says, you know, project checklist of all the things that they should go through to update.
Yeah.
We could actually maybe get double duty on that by, that list is going to be the same for new projects joining as well. So maybe we could just do a new project checklist and get everybody to know, like, even locations of assets, things like, you know, graphics that they can put on their site.
It's a good point.
Okay, so I've added that to the list, and I don't know if we had, do we have a volunteer to open an issue for that, where we can dive into a bit more details?
I can open an issue. I like checklists, so.
Yeah, it would make sense. So if we have a separate issue, we can start to build the checklist there.
Okay, I can do that.
Sounds good.
Okay, we are over the hour. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Our next meeting will be next week at, I believe, what is it, 2 p.m. Eastern Time? And then look forward to catching up with everyone then. Thank you, everyone who joined.
Thanks, everyone.
Later. Bye.
Cheers.